Welcome everybody. This is one of my favorite sessions because I just think it's so impactful no matter what role people have. It also is crammed full of information and some students that I adore as far as like stories and what we can do with this. And so hopefully we can get through the whole thing in a way that makes sense to you, because I love this idea. And I know that IEPs are something that can be something that facilitates this stuff. It can also be stuff that can cause a barrier. There's legalities there. There's just a lot of myths too. So I want to have an opportunity to answer questions and think out loud with you about it as well. Super brief, because I know some people probably have heard this twice now, but the TIES Center is at the University of Minnesota. We are a National Technical Assistance Center that's focused on increasing inclusive opportunities for kids who have the most extensive support needs. The T is time in general education. We need to be present in the gen ed. To get to the I, which is the instructional effectiveness, make sure that people don't just have a seat in the class, but we help different levels of school systems to understand how to effectively engage students in content. The E is that engagement in the gen ed content and with peers. It's a really strong piece of our TIES work, is to make sure that there's access and engagement within general education standards-based grade level curriculum with your grade level peers. And then of course the systems that support that. We don't want to just create a bunch of vapor trails, that all of these skill sets that we build up together, and then when that student moves on, then so do those ways of communicating and collaborating. And so all the way from the top down systems, state, district, school level systems, and those student systems and things for families and communities to consider. So that's us. Today I'm here alone, even though it said that there would be two of us. My colleague Jessica had a death in her family this week and is not able to be here with me today. Which is very sad, but she was definitely a part of all of the content creation. So, I just want to acknowledge that. Our session outcomes today, I hope that you come out of here understanding and just considering how IEPs can be a very important process and doorway into inclusive practices and gen ed access. I want you to recognize the family and professional relationship and have some ideas on how to make that easier, better, more consistent, transparent. And then I really want you to think about the Education Day at a Glance tool. That's one of those ones where people are like, oh my gosh, this is something I've needed for a long time. But specifically to help you see how it can be put into practice, because matrices are ubiquitous and they've been all over for a long time, but how do you do it within this framework and thinking about it, and what can we use it for? Anything you will need for today is there. I know that you also have the app on your phone about the conference stuff. Some of that is PDFs, I've heard. These are not. These should be accessible, and if there are things to be filled in, these would be the ones that you could edit on your phone and things like that. This session, there's not a ton of things that you, like group work that you'd be filling things in, but this is the most recent list that we've got, and probably the more accessible version of content. So I'll give you a minute. The Z link will stay the same. That resource page will always be there if you need it. Anything that comes up today, because we have so many resources that we're constantly sharing from the TIES Center, anything that comes up when we're having conversation and questions, if I think of something that would be, oh my gosh, I wish I had told you about this, I will put those links into this page, so it'll stay live for this group, and I will add those things in. Okay. We know as adults we need to reflect on what we're doing. We need to stop and think together. We know that by reflecting on something, on our own experience, that then you can transfer that knowledge to how other people think and go through space and time. So we are going to do this. It's also a part of getting your voice in the room, right? And so in a huge room like this, with, you know, not everybody sitting around a table together, and with, you know, the ability to have some in the back, some in the front, one here, one there. It's also intentional that way, of getting you up and into a position that you will be with a partner, because there might be things that I want you to talk about in a little bit too. So take this time to find yourself an elbow partner. If you don't have one, please move yourself so you can find one. And answer this question. I'm just going to give you a couple minutes. Think about when you learned to drive. And then discuss these questions with your partner. Where did you learn? Who were you with? When did you know when you're ready to venture out on your own? Take about 2 minutes each. Anybody want to share? Raise your hand. We got to get a mic to you. Hate to cut off the conversation, but we got to talk more.
It's not that crazy. My dad had a very old pickup. Long bed shifter, no power steering, and I learned on that. So I'm like, if you can learn to drive on that car, you can drive anything. Now there's like no stick shifts that exist, but that was my fun experience. And I was just saying, I was the year that they added the 6-month law, and so my friends in October were so lucky, and I got stuck with the 6 months.
Oh,
so,
no.
you know, tough year, tough year.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thinking about who were you with? When did you know then you were ready to get out on the road? Anything like that?
Oh, wait.
Oh, hold on 1 second.
I think something that across all three of us, or actually 2 of us, and then one of us said that their dad said, but when you're ready. We really didn't have like a when you're ready kind of like aha moment. Like we were able to recall the details of those other parts, but the details of like when we decided we were ready was kind of like, I don't really know. We kind of just did it. Teenage minds making up decisions, you know. And then our one partner said that her father said, you know, okay, you're ready to start your driver's test. So we didn't really. I think all 3 of us didn't really have that set aha moment.
Thank you. So why might I be asking this at all? You might be wondering. Other than just a conversation starter that it might be, which it always is. There's always, you know, some ideas around like cemeteries and, you know, like where people learn to drive, you know. I learned in Duluth, Minnesota. It was about 40 below wind chill. I'm a March birthday, right? And the hills, it's like the San Francisco of the Midwest, right? So if you can learn there, to your point, if you can learn there, you can drive anywhere. Point being that despite this, right? So you're in a parking lot, you're in a cemetery driving, you're you know, like in a field, wherever it is, at some point you move out of that place and you go practice in different people, places, settings, right? And build up the confidence. There are ways of fading the supports and things that you have. I remember when I wanted like my adult, you know, my parents to be out of the car and I wanted my brother to be there instead, you know, things like that. When you want your music, so there's a progression, right? But the point being that you can drive anywhere if you still have your license, you're able to drive like on the other side of the street in Europe and make sense of it. You know, you're able to read signs, you're able to ask for help if you need it. So part of what we're going to talk about today is this notion that there are thousands of teachable moments every single day for kids. And how do we capitalize on that and still maintain an IEP that's getting us further down the road, but also acknowledging that those people, places, and settings that we need to have kids be exposed to, the only way we're going to get them out of the parking lot is to get them out of the parking lot and start supporting them there. And part of that is having an inclusively written IEP, okay? So in our work in Washington State, in 1 week, we had all 3 of these different roles. You know, we had a gen ed teacher, a parent, and a special ed teacher basically asking, how do we do this? How do we share our practice? What does this actually look like? And that's why we developed this resource that we're going to talk about today. So if I could only see how this IEP fits within the grade level content, I could figure out how to make it work. You know, typically it's not, I don't want that kid here, right? It's, I don't see it, I can't see it. What's my role in it? Like, what does this have to do with what I'm doing over here? Like, help me. A parent saying, and this is during COVID, you know, right after COVID, a parent saying, I'm supporting him with his gen ed classwork at home, but when do we work on his IEP goals? You know? Like, he's doing his homework, but I don't see it. Like, those things are important too, right? Special ed teacher, agreed, but I'm unsure how to make that integration happen, right? That's an issue, because special ed teachers, a lot of the time, unless we do this in a very deliberate and intentional way, that's not their experience either. So, you know, this is hopefully an answer to that. I should say, it reminds me on this last slide, we did this resource with UW Herring Center at the University of Washington, so I just wanted to say that as well. So you'll see the double branding on there. We are very lucky to have partners that we've done this work with, and this was with them. So there are 4 steps basically to it. We're going to give more attention to some and less attention to others, in part because of time, also in part because there are other sessions that would do better to focus on that. For example, the ongoing collaboration piece. If you got to see my 5:15:45 one last hour, that focuses on there, but I can put some of the tools that really help with that collaboration piece. We will touch on it, but I will have those in the resources so you can really dig into it. But really focusing on 2 and 3, but not without starting at that collaborative conversation. So when you really think about it, we have to think about, you know, what family priorities are, what they're coming, you know, it's got to start with that. And we have to have families understand what's going on in the gen ed class, especially if their student has not been participating there before. This is really hard to read, so we won't stay on here for very long. It's in your slide deck and that resource page. It's just kind of a flow chart that we thought of and where to insert some tools in this process. And on the left-hand side, I can't even read it from here either, which is a bad sign. But, you know, focusing on that gen ed, the green side is the gen ed curriculum, instruction, and context. We have to understand what those pieces are. And then the purple side, or the right-hand side, is the focus on the individual student. So there's this whole spectrum of, you know, what are we going to do within gen ed? What's the point? What's the standard? What are the barriers to access? What's the instruction going to look like? And we still have to have that conversation about that individual kid needs. We cannot let that go, right? So there's kind of this tension between the two. The other thing we have to think about is that the IEP is not the curriculum. Students are general education students. We used to say first. Kids with disabilities are gen ed students first. We at the Tice Center don't say that anymore. It's just they're gen ed students, which seems like a slight language difference, but it's really not, right? And those language differences mean a lot. But so the assumptions have to be that the general education curriculum, the standards-based curriculum with access and engagement with your peers is an assumption that we're going to make, that this is an important piece. And their IEP together makes the program for a student with a disability, right? It has to be both. It can't be just one. And especially if you have just what you're writing in your IEP as your program, that's when we see those adult outcomes just tank. If we're only focused on those things. And I will probably, despite the fact that I will try hard not to launch into 100 stories about kids today, I will tell you some of where that IEP has been the program and how that looks versus when it's not, right? And what kind of outcomes you get. You have to have both. You have to be able to hold both. Because the IEP's job is to support progress in gen ed curriculum and routines. That's the IEP's job. It also makes us accountable, and it gives us something to take data on, right? We don't take data on everything that's important. We take data on the things that we want to specifically target as a team to move forward on and make progress on, with that assumption that the exposure and the engagement and the access to the gen ed, we know from research, if you saw my first one today, that that's where the richness lies, is with your peers. It also is a place where we can address all those other essential skills that support a student's independence, interdependence across school, home, and other community environments, right? We have to get those skills that you would want to do in a parking lot, so to speak. We know that kids have they have needs that we need to meet. Question is, where are we going to take them out to drive them, right? And how fast, and there always has to be an exit plan. And an IEP can be extremely supportive of that thinking, even just in the language we use and the way that we write the goals. So, 2 tools to start your collaboration off right. We use the 5-15-45 tool for that as well. And there's a tool for overarching learning components. So when you look at this resource, these things will be hot linked there. So as you're looking at it with your team and which parts, there's also a planning sheet that takes all of this information, and it's like on a 2-pager. So it's almost like a checklist. Once you kind of get it in your head and as a team, and you can kind of go in and think of whether or not you did it. It also has success indicators of really thinking about, asking questions like at an IEP. Did this person, like if you really focused on belonging, for example, or peer engagement, asking those questions of a friend of this student at the IEP. Could be like, about birthday parties or, whatever. So there are different pieces in there that you may or may not think of that get at the stuff that we'll be describing today. So that initial collaborative conversation is inclusive of the family, right? So whether this is an IEP meeting, whether it's something that, like if a person is transition age and you're really understanding what the priorities or where the direction is. If it's preschool, those conversations might be different. You'll think of like different places that you're having these naturally, right? But deliberately having this type of conversation where you can talk about the role of an IEP in the way that I'm describing it. It's a roadmap. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the puzzle, right? An important part of that is for them to understand what gen ed looks like. Like we have to take some of the mystery out of that too, especially if families don't have that experience with it. There's fear there. There's fear all the way around. So some of this is just to like name it and be able to talk about it, right? And some of it is vital for you as educators to be able to like understand completely so that you're aligning what you're doing with the priorities of the family and of the student themselves. It's both and. One of the things is helping the family understand a vision for their child. We have examples in the resource of that, but I love this one. And I think about it as the vision statement is where you want to go, the mission statement being how you're going to get there, right? So imagine if a family could see their student in this way, or have educators see their student in this way. And I always think about like, what is it that goes before that student into any class is their IEP, right? Typically, right? Like you may not as a gen ed teacher know this person very well, but you're going to read their IEP. And so language is everything. What's communicated there is everything. And I often have people think about, like if you were to insert your name into that IEP, would you want to be described that way to every teacher you're going to have before you even show up? So those are good questions to ask, right? But a vision statement is one of those things that can really help a family put forward what it is that they want people to be thinking about. And it's easy to just have this be a part of the process of people having it. I'm going to read it out loud, even though I don't typically read out slides, but this one is tough to see, I'm sure. I will live my vision statement. I will live my adulthood independently, attend college, and pursue my career of choice. I have a likable personality which I will use to build meaningful, long-lasting connections and relationships with others. I will find long-term companionship and love with a significant other. Get married if I choose to do so. As an independent man, I will have lots of opinions and ideas and apply my leadership skills to both my education journey and my future career. I will have my own hobbies, activities, and interests that I enjoy. I will have confidence, morals, integrity, ethics, and be respectful to others. I will see myself living with a disability as a source of pride and joy and understand my self-worth. My community will embrace me as a neurodiverse man, being that brings value to the world. And their mission statement. I want to learn in an inclusive education environment with my same-age peers at my neighborhood school. To make my vision successful, I need my environment to prepare me for the real world. My classmates will eventually be those I work with, live among, and build relationships with. My peers will learn to view me as an important member of my class, and thus ultimately in the future, they will see me as a contributing, worthy, confident, and autonomous member of society. Wow. Now, does it have to be that? No. But how cool is that if that's what's preceding a kid, or that's a part of an IEP that you could look at, right? Strengths and talents, top tips. Things I love, what doesn't work. This example is within the resource if you want to look at it. How do we help families put something like this together? It could be as simple as sending an example to them and say, could you make one of these? Because you can see through this that the family priorities are coming through. The way that they see it, the way that they talk about their child is there, right? And it'll look different for different families, but we also have to consider language and different ways to help people think through it, right? But those are things that we can do and stop and think about, like within our context. How do we get everybody to write something like this for their student? Here are some questions that you could prompt a family. These are also in that the shorter version, the planning sheet. Questions like this, like when I said at an IEP meeting that you'd ask a friend if they've asked, has anyone asked them to a birthday party or whatever. There are questions to prompt families to help them think through what they might want to think. What are their strengths? Where do you plan on them playing and living in the future, right? When we know these things, then instruction can become more robust, more rich, more varied, right? Even for those kids who have the most extensive support needs. One of the things that we talk a lot about is, transition-aged students and who's, self-determination and self-advocacy and things like that. Cooper is one that I'm going to talk about quite extensively in a minute about what his IEP looks like. He's going to be one of the education day. Actually, the only one, I think. I took out one other one because of time, but that too is in the resource. But one of the things that we have focused on for Cooper since he started being included in 6th grade was self-determination, self-advocacy. And this is him running his own IEP meeting when he was a freshman, I think. Hopefully the volume will be up high enough. If not, I want to make sure that we stop and do that just so that you can hear him. But I also have the captions set because he uses an AAC device and he uses his words and sign language. And you'll see. But this is him at his IEP meeting. His teachers, you'll see him like pointing when he's talking about that class or that person, he points at them. Or, what else is important to know? I think that's it for going into it. But just to imagine, and then I'll tell you more about him as a human as we go along today.
You can do it. Yep, just push the button one time. Yep, one button. Go for it, dude. And let it listen. Go. Anna.
My IEP meeting. Good morning. Thank you for meeting with me.
Turn up.
I really like second hour. Mr.
Yeah.
B is
Push the arrow. There you go.
Luke and I discussed the pros and cons of school. I really like using the whiteboard. Maybe I could use a small one in class.
Push the arrow. Do it all at once. We're not going to talk about it.
I have some friends like Luke, Isadore, Lily, Abby, and Shankar. I would like some more.
Push the arrow. 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 Yeah. You got it.
Reading is important to me. I like using Pictello and Seesaw. I will try to work on Snap and Core. I would like to use my phone more to keep me organized. All kids like to use phones.
All kids.
Push the button.
Dicka is cool. And my favorite thing about Miss Allard is Bart, and she lets us tell jokes in class. This is me fun things to help us all learn more.
Do you want to do that one?
I really like school. Thank you for helping me learn and for including me with the other kids and in this meeting.
So Cooper was, except for recess and PE maybe, was in a self-contained class until 6th grade in his neighborhood school. And Mom didn't necessarily know anything other than she turns out to be an extremely well informed advocate for him. But at the time, inclusive practices wasn't like necessarily that she knew the benefits and the outcomes that he would have and that he does have now. She just knew that he was vulnerable. And there was an incident that happened that made her think he is very vulnerable. So when you think about inclusive practices, that's one of the things that I think about too, is that if you are in, and if you were in the first session with me this morning and read Maggie's story, that's one of the parents' things. Like if you're out in the world with everybody, there's more eyes, there's more people, there's less of, you know. So even just that fear, okay, going back to that fear piece of how do we be transparent and whatever. So he was fully included. We just jumped right into the pool with Cooper. And this IEP meeting, he, with his best friend Luke, who is this young man who does not have an IEP, that he built a relationship through classes, and we'll talk again more about his IEP and things, but Luke helped him put that together on his device. Okay, so they spent time after school and on weekends coming up with it. He had the time to process it. He had the time to think about it, right? But it was his words. The other piece of it is that you hear things like, I have some friends, I want more. That was important. This is the most relationship-driven kid I've ever worked with, I think. Super sensitive to just those nuances of even just nonverbal things. And if you were to like need to go out on vacation or something, you'd better let him know, otherwise he thinks that you've left him, you know? So like just being really, really intentional about those things. So his comment of, I want more, I have some, I need more. He was in a DECA class, or business class of some sort in high school, and then ended up being in DECA with those kids that he just listed. And he ended up, like, flash forward, interviewing at Medtronic with them, with his AAC device, I will also say that his AAC device, we went through 4 different types of AAC and communication, and because we just couldn't get the right one for him. We could tell that there was more in there to help him express. He used sign language, he uses his words. And different times of his life, he was more or less confident with that, right? And you can imagine, if you're in a self-contained classroom and you go into a gen ed, part of the IEP goals for him was to ask people for help, was to engage with people with his AAC, right? Now he's running his own IEP meetings. I'll come back to him as far as what you're seeing here and what that meant. But it builds on itself. But this is about self-determination and getting family and student voice, and that's the first step. How do we do that? So second and third steps, we're looking at it, creating an IEP that gets us to that end, right? And I will tell you now that he is off doing great things as a young adult who is just done with transition. But how do we get to that end? Again, that parking lot metaphor, taking it out on the road, right? We've got the student and the parent at the beginning, at the top, the student as much as we possibly can, but also family priorities or what the parents and family want, especially in the case where students may not have the voice to put words to it yet, or the means to put words to it yet, right? So we really have to focus on that part. But then these 3 buckets, acknowledging the thousands of teachable moments across the day, acknowledging that we're assuming gen ed access and engagement, and then this IEP is to support that, right? So participating in routines and transitions is a massive thing to think about. How do kids get to and from class on their own, more independently, more often? How do they take care of their materials and their things? These are all post-life outcome transition related that we can start at preschool age, right? I have 20, 22, and 24-year-olds. None of them had an IEP going through school, and I'm still battling with them about participating in transitions and routines the way that I would like them to, Feed the dogs. Feed them when they're hungry. Feed them when it's time, So that's a huge part. Like everyday life, coming and going. Where's your cubby? Where do you sit? It's small group time. It's large group time, right? How do we get them to do that more often? How do we get them to do it without us? Engaging in grade level academics and other essential skills. So this one, the grade level academics, absolutely. And let's talk instruction. We talked instruction last time. We can talk instruction again, I think, in the next session. But really that grade level academics and how to do that, and we're going to use the education day at a glance to show you a little bit more about that as well. But those other essential skills, give me an idea of what we mean by that. I can repeat it if we don't have to run around. Just like raise your hand and I'll repeat what you say so that we can get it on the mic. What would we mean by other essential skills? If interacting with others is the third bucket, right? How do you learn along with the academics? Is that what you said? How to be a learner, yep.
Identifying your best mode of response.
Identifying your best mode of response, yep. Communicating, I missed the middle one. Prioritizing. Yeah. Problem solving. Mm-hmm. Goal setting. How about behavior? That's an essential skill. Knowing about your own behavior, knowing what to do, what triggers you, what to do in those, right? Those are essential skills too. Language, communication can fall in there too. Using, and especially if you're thinking of English learners who also have disabilities, what language do you need to do the things that we're asking? Not just vocabulary, but what are the language pieces? Because sometimes we assume, it might even be like using PowerPoints to do the presentation that you're expected to do, right? So thinking about IEP goal areas that help you do those things that we might take for granted for other kids, that can be a goal that we're specifically targeting that then gains access into that gen ed setting for them, because we're taking data on that, we're paying attention to it, right? And of course, the interacting with others. And I don't mean that this is just the speech language bucket. This is not one role that sits there. You should appreciate that. But this is looking at Cooper's AAC when we talked about how many times we had to talk about, and there are times now that he understands which mode he wants to use, right? So it's the conversational turns. For him, we got to a point where he would just like turn around and walk away, and we're like, you know what, we're gonna target that next, because that's just rude, Like he just like, so he could communicate, he would communicate, but when he was done, he'd turn around and walk out. And peers were like, what? Where'd he go? So we helped him with that. We focused on that for a while of intentional. So you get it. So within these 3 buckets then, I would challenge you that there isn't anything within a gen ed setting that a person with a disability couldn't gain some progress and skills. And so ideas around this, again, thousands of teachable moments. We're going to maximize that learning throughout the day when we're thinking about participating in routines and transitions. We talk about having 6 to 8 goals only. Because anything more than that, it's going to be monster, right? And there are some kids that have some pretty complex needs, but how do we make those goals varied, rich, and broad so that it's including all these things? So having a goal around participating in routines and transitions. Embedded instruction, taught through direct instruction, taught through implicit modeling, right? Like we want to make sure that that's there. We don't want to lose those parts. We know that they need them, but how do we make sure that it's built in? If you're going to be using your technology for a presentation, then how are we going to make sure that we're not like pulling a person out into that parking lot to teach the technology before they get to do the presentation? How do we embed all of that? What could it look like? It could be, and it was for Cooper in particular, managing his own materials. He had an iPad, he had a Chromebook, he had his water bottle that he would not leave, and if he did, you were in some big trouble because you'd have to go, like, right? We had an expectation of him getting to class. He has a physical disability. It took him extra time. We didn't want him getting out early to necessarily do that. He was so social. We talked about that. He's talking to everybody in the hallway all the time. Like he'd be late for class all the time for one reason or another. So having him aware also that this is a goal we have for you, that you get into class, you set up your things, you have all your stuff. We're not carrying your backpack for you, Those are all really big deals. And then having a checklist for him so he could figure out once he's there if he's done all the stuff. And it was tough at first. He didn't do it very independently at first. But now he takes a picture if he's locked outside of a door and texts it to the person that can help him. He couldn't do that if we didn't give him that rope to figure that out, right? Again, large group, small group, transitions within a building. Another student that I can think of used to come in from the bus and go to her cubby, and it was like every step of the way, you'd have to go and put your lunch thing, pull your thing and put it into a cup and pick out hot or cold lunch, and then you'd have to go over and put your homework in another, so all the routines we had for everybody else, but she had a paraprofessional that was telling her every step of the way where she had to be. And so for her, very visual, we would put whatever the next step was, we'd put that visual in the last spot she was, right? Come in, hang your coat up, she'd see the picture of then go to lunch cup, and then it's so forth, right? So it's just like thinking through some of those things so people can have those routines embedded. We don't necessarily have to have that be the instruction. We just embed it throughout their day. Again, we talked about grade level academics, others, we're talking organizational things. Use of technology, behavior, thinking about goals that can help with that. Big ideas, essential vocabulary. We have a lot around instruction of like thinking about those big ideas. How do we offer better access to the environments? How do we make sure that they have those foundational pieces? How do we make sure they have the technology to do it? And again, interacting with others. The belonging piece is huge. We don't want them just sitting there. We don't want them visitors. We want them welcomed, right? So the interacting with others is a really huge piece, and communication is huge. Again, we want our broad, rich, and varied goals so that it goes across people, places, and settings. An example would be a self-advocacy goal. Does a person identify that they have a problem at all that they need help with? Who do they look to get that help? Do they know who that person is? Do they actually go and ask that person? And then, can we have that person be less and less a teacher, para, adult, and more often a peer? That whole progression that I just said, depending on the student, depending on the context, depending on the way that they're communicating, can be something that starts in kindergarten and is something that they're doing in college or beyond, in their integrated work environment, whatever, right? Now you have to ask a coworker. Which coworker makes sense for this, you see? So writing goals like that, that's one of 6 I think that should be on everybody's personally, is the self-advocacy goal of like, go find someone to ask, and can we do it from a buddy more often? That's good data, okay? Here's a routines and transitions non-example. Non-preferred activity. How many people have seen like goals around non-preferred activities, right? Ay, ay, ay. So we want people to improve their transitions, and we want them to do it with fewer prompts, right? So this makes sense. This is what we want. But couldn't it be this? With the materials and checklists. See, now I'm not changing anything legally about this. I'm not making it like so monster hard for anybody, but I'm being more specific and clear. You can see the richness that's there. You can see how this would happen outside of the parking lot and in the gen ed. Right? Another one. Here's a math non-example. Okay? We're giving them a problem, we're going to have them calculate it, and then we're going to watch how many times they can calculate that right. Or we're going to give them a whole bunch of tools that they can choose from. We're going to ask them to select the appropriate tool for that math problem to solve the problem with 80%. So again, it's not just like, show me that you know this problem. It's show me that you can pull out your stuff, you can have it in your backpack, you can have it ready. Essential skills, CVC words, touching the correct flashcard, right? Or you'll see yes or no, you know? Like, the scope of these goals are this, when they could be this. It's not that we're giving up on CVC words, it's just that we're going to do it in a different way. And we're going to have a whole team understanding that goal in a different way. It's during reading block. We're going to have some different prompts. We could add things about who's prompting, right? Could be peers, could be, you know? When walking down the hall, they'll respond by saying hello to the peers who say hi to him 100% of the time. Hopefully you see a couple things wrong with this one. Right? How about when in a small group situation doing projects, that he'll initiate and engage reciprocal communication using any mode. Again, Cooper had very, very specific tastes on when he was going to use what and who he was going to use it for. So let's give him the opportunity and let's keep track of it, right? Okay. Partner work, different partner work. Asking relevant questions, giving feedback. This assumes that they'll have the means to do it, right? So there might be things that need to be in place, some containers for them to put it in, right? There might be a way of like, that they know, and this is, spoiler alert, what we did with Cooper was to set up things, and we actually used Seesaw. Now, most people think of Seesaw as something that little people use in elementary school. Seesaw, I encourage you, and you'll see some of it on here, I encourage you to use Seesaw for a lot of different ideas. We could video him clicking and dragging and answering questions. It was data for us. We have files of things. We could go back and show progress. And the other thing that it did was that because Mom was a part of that group on Seesaw, our relationships grew, our trust grew, the collaboration was there. She could have conversations at home about his day, specific. I see that you did, so pictures and videos and things that are right there. He would also use Seesaw to just take pictures. In fact, he took a picture of a tile that was missing in the hallway, and he put it on his Seesaw and put a note in there using speech to text and said something about, hey, Mr. Jones, what's up with this? And he sent it to the principal because he thought that was like, he's like, what? And a lot of time he'll say, what a mess. Like it's just one of those things that if you're talking to him, that comes out of his mouth all the time, what a mess. When really he means is, what's up with that? Who's gonna fix that? So we gave him the way to do it, and Seesaw was it. So you'll see some more Seesaw. I don't know how we're doing on time. Okay. So I don't want to do another think, pair, share, but I do want to pause. Are there questions? And my question for you is, can you see how this would be different than the IEPs that you're writing right now? Like, does this align? Does it not align? Are you seeing things that would be, oh, in my district we couldn't do that because fill in the blank?
I'm thinking of one particular student that I work with. The family wants the services, they want the child fully included, but they don't want the child to know that they have any type of disability or anything like that. So I'm just thinking about like some of these self-advocacy type things, and he's on the spectrum. And so a lot of that is what he needs, but
Yeah.
they don't want us to let him know that he has any disabilities or anything like that. So how would you handle something like that?
So he himself doesn't know that he has an IEP? That's an interesting question. Well, and I think that then it's, but the teachers all know. He's how old, did you say?
Well, only the teachers that work with him. Like, no one in the building is allowed to know. Like, the parents are very private about it.
Yeah.
Only in second grade.
Yeah, okay. I have ideas about that. I don't know if the whole group wants to hear my ideas about that. There are, just even thinking about membership, belonging, ways to like get kids involved with one another, peer arrangements. I think that, if there are parts where, like you're saying, the self-advocacy piece, like if there's a goal around that and he doesn't even know it, right? So we'd had this similar situation with Cooper, and I'm just using Cooper because you saw him at his IEP and it's easier to like strand this through. It's not like it's only one kid this works for. Just wanted to put that little disclaimer. So for him, we had something where he was using sign language a lot during lunch. And we had a goal to monitor how many back and forth conversations and which mode of, we had to figure out which mode he prefers, and could we do some tweaking on the AAC? Why is he not using that? And, it turns out actually this is really silly. Sometimes you just need to take a step back and think about the most obvious thing, his AAC had a female voice on it. Yuck, what teenage boy wants that? So, but, but there were things about that lunchroom experience. He didn't want us in his face, So we had to become pretty clever about standing way back and being able to just have those objectives, what are we actually taking data on, and how can we make sure that we're on the same page. It sounds like the mom might be or parents might be just really in tune with what this looks like and how to do it. And so I would just go back to that step one and some of the conversation starters in there of how can we make this look, and what do you want? What are those priorities? And then just kind of as a team thinking about them. Because it really is, if you focus on certain things, and this is another student that I'm thinking about in my mind, as an IEP team, if you don't take that family, what they're coming with, and think about how to do that in the setting and what goals, because we still need the goals. We still need to know how this is looking. And sometimes if we don't do that initial step real well, or take the time to really understand why that is the way that it is, then we'll get into these things where we're taking data on some crazy stuff. We really do, as educators, come up with some crazy things to sit and take data on. I know a team that, there was a person who had really significant behaviors, and they were watching how long this kid could sit and pay attention. So, and the answer was sit 15 minutes, pay attention 15 seconds at a time. Okay, so we were focused on these things, right? But then when you open it up as to the bigger, who else is paying attention? So really having those conversations and understanding why we're taking the data that we are. And in that situation, I would think that they're very, if they have that much of a strong opinion of who knows what, they probably also have strong opinions about what do you want us to take data on? Where's the progress that you want to see? And then just start there. That was a really long answer for that. Okay. Oh, yeah. Let's do one more.
Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah.
So our school is pretty new in the inclusion world, which, I'm glad that we're here. So moving forward, one of the issues we came into last year was grading and with the inclusion. And we had a big controversial thing about National Honor Society where, because on paper they look like they belong in National Honor Society. And we went through the whole... in National Honor Society, they have that piece that is the honorary members of National Honor Society or something. But then there was a lot of gen ed parents pushing back on it too because they felt that their standards weren't the same, not understanding that for this kid to be in this class and doing the things that they're doing is awesome. Might not look like your child's, but we had a lot of pushback on it. So I have my beliefs, but I want to be able to communicate it in a way and have a system in place that allows all parties to feel comfortable. And I know you can't make everybody feel comfortable, but all parties at least understand where we're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that question. Two things. One, I will put a link in the resources page that is our inclusive educational roadmap that helps from start to future around creating leadership teams that have stakeholders that are representative of these groups that you're talking about. Families that want it to look one way and families that want it to look the other way. And how do you still move this work forward? Because we know that research tells us this is good for everybody, right? And so I will put that in there just because it's a systemic look at how to do it, which I feel is a huge piece of this. I also say, yay that people are actually talking about grading and assessment in the terms of wow, there must be enough noise around including kids well enough, unless it is truly like, nope, they can't because, it's gonna affect our grades and stuff, which I think that happens a lot too. But there are a number of resources around grading and assessment and rubrics and creating UDL types of things that I think it helps families to see too, because those would be the rubrics that are coming home that, something that would include someone using their AAC device all the way up to like, really enhancing what they're presenting. Like you give all the options and kids are going to tend to choose the one that has the highest expectations for them. So how do we make rubrics and grading and assessment that shows that kids can achieve as high as that we hope them to be and access? So that's another thing, I'll put some in there. And I would also, what was the third point on that? It'll come back to me. I just think that those parts of really engaging in those conversations, I think is really important for people to have. You will see when we get to Education Day at a Glance how this looks for Cooper in a class that had some families that were really trying to understand, kids that didn't have IEPs. I've also helped AP Geography, a 9th grade AP Geography. Cooper was not that person, but to help the team of 9th graders in this high school that is a high school that prides itself as being the best in the city, and all these things. Like there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen, both about the why and the how, and then also to really listen to those conversations. So I think we have to hold it all in kind of these, the IER will help with that as to like how to create those spaces for people to have those conversations, because they're important. If we had a grading and assessment session, I could help you think more specifically, but I will put those resources in just to your point, to be able to bring something to the people that you're having conversations with, to start conversations. So, yeah. Okay, so the IEP is one thing, and once you've got 6 to 8 goals like we just talked about, hammered out, right? Now we want to make sure that we're actually implementing them in the classroom, and that's where the Educational Day at a Glance comes in. And this is probably one of the favorite things that people come out of this session with, is this tool. So I think it is, well, I know it is linked in that resource page, but it's also within our web publication of this resource. Here is our guy, and this was just after people were coming back from COVID, and he was in his anatomy class. Now, if you were in the first session and I said something about someone being like a light switch, about the least dangerous assumption being the thing that made sense to him, this is that teacher. He had never had anybody like Cooper in his class before. He had the high flyers. He has the kids that this was an elective. You didn't have to take anatomy. And it was a semester-long course for kids who wanted to challenge themselves. And I said, hey, that's cool. Let's put Cooper in there, right? He had a bunch of buddies in there. There were all sorts of different things. And he's like, whoa. But the least dangerous assumption that you can make about a person is that they can. And if we can think that way, then we can make instruction match. And that, for this teacher, was like, he thought about that the whole time. Like, I just kept thinking, I know he can. What can I do to help him show me? So, Education Day at a Glance is basically just the daily schedule down the left-hand side, the embedded goals that within that class, we as a team come together and figure out which ones are going to be a priority for that class. We don't have to have all 8 goals met in one class. We can make sure that we're just doing all 8 goals some point, but we have to have those collaborative conversations to know how often and where, right? Third column is supports and accommodations. So what are you gonna need for that class? And for Cooper, like we've been talking about, we need, his AAC device. He needs a key for his locker coming in. He needs, graphic organizers. There were whiteboards, because he asked for them in his IEP meeting, right? But he wouldn't need all of it all day, but which ones, right? Which ones does he need? So for example, his 11th grade, period 1 English, We wanted him to work on goal 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7 out of 8. So we wanted him to be answering questions using his AAC device. And again, that was because, to our point before, of like not wanting to like push into lunch, but we were going to push into English. And we were going to make sure that he was using his AAC device there. We weren't going to make sure that he was using it with his peers at lunch. If he wanted to talk and use sign, great, right? He was writing sentences. This was something that, as you can imagine, has been something that took, like he hadn't had reading instruction until 6th grade. So writing sentences was kind of this slow process for him, helping him do that. Communicating knowledge, telling us what he knows. Entering homework, emailing the teacher, routines and transitions. We wanted him to be responsible for putting his stuff in, where it needs to go, talking to the teacher if he needed help, things like that. Small group projects and interactions, that again was like within those smaller groups, specific things around communication. That's where we wanted that goal to be. And increasing his AAC use. You can see the supports and accommodations over here. One of the things that we did, and one of the things I would suggest that you consider, is those evidence-based practices such as graphic organizers and how to use those. So Seesaw was one thing for him. That's a technology piece that I would say go explore how you might use that in different ways. Graphic organizers is another one. Even if you just have a few of them that just work for a kid, you know, and then you just use those consistently. We had that for him, and we could build complexity. You know, have one main idea, 2 supporting things, and then you teach a kid like Cooper how to use not only the graphic organizer, but be able to like go and search stuff and click and drag over it, right? So the routines and transitions are in there too, but putting something like that consistently in front of him was super important so that he could consistently tell us what he knows. Oh, forgot I had motion in that one. So anatomy was the space where we could do all 8 of his IEP goals. So an Education Day at a Glance just has like the brief versions of accommodations and the brief version of the IEP goals, but then the last page has the full IEP goals and the full list of accommodations. So if you do have like a substitute teacher or a paraprofessional or something like that, that it would all be there, right? But for the rest of us, we just need like, oh yeah, what am I looking at here? What am I, you know, so you can see how trying to be efficient. But we could have him doing all of them, including self-advocacy, and what else did we? Oh, number sense and calculator use. Those were the 2 that weren't in reading and literature. These were his more filled out goals that were in the back. Literal comprehension of connected literary text. Independently writing sentence about a given topic. Skills needed to communicate knowledge. So again, that's his AAC, that's his ASL, that's knowing when to say something, knowing how to walk away, etc. So there are many different parts of that. Increasing independence when entering his gen ed class. Material schedules, presentations, and homework into a schedule. So thinking back to his media literacy class, where there was a rubric and there were expectations on your presentation. One of the rubric pieces that the teacher just added in with Cooper in mind was that if you needed your speaker, you would have it charged and ready to go and be able to, you know, because, and yes, he happened to be the only one that was there that needed it, but he learned to bring his speaker, charge it up the night before, because that was what he'd have to plug into his AAC device so that when he hit his AAC, it would project, right? But just putting it in the rubric with everybody else was not a big deal. Social emotional, that was all increasing social interactions. He was a kid that at first, if he didn't know people, he would like just do this. And so just getting him more and more comfortable and getting the peers around him to be more and more comfortable. You should see him in the DECA group. Or interviewing. I have a great picture of him with his little AAC device and a bow tie. I don't think it's in here. It's pretty awesome. Using his AAC and increasing self-advocacy skills. And for him, he was one where it was like ultimately figuring out how many different people can we have him talk to, in part because he would do this. Like, how do we make sure that he's able to do that? Here's an example of his AAC. So you will see all 8 goals represented in these 2 AAC screens. We've got date and time. We've got vocabulary words that were highlighted, those big ideas. What's the most essential content? He would have one like this for every class. He's got a picture of kids who are on Zoom. This was a hybrid class. He's got his modified notes so that he has the way to research things, to go into his computer and find a video that's related to it. That's where his graphic organizers were. And it sounds much more complex than it was. It was literally like we just needed to teach him how to get into the things, and he could pull it up and start doing this stuff. And his whiteboard, which his peers would write on, because that's what he wanted. And here again, we've got ways to write a sentence, which we would then have him email his teacher, right? But you can see all of the different things that are represented here. What do you, I think I'm pretty close on time. What do you think, I'm going to go back here if there are any questions related to, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't. Questions, comments, things to think about. How do I have 2 minutes left? I have 4 minutes left. Education day at a glance, good thing, I would think.
How did those conversations look between the special ed teacher and the gen ed teacher? I know time is always non-existent in a school day. So were there times planned out when they could chat to talk about the planner or modify notes or what his device looks like or vocabulary? Like, what did that look like?
I will give you 2 answers. One is I will definitely put a resource in because my last session was on the 51545 tool that we developed with CAST to be universally designed and help teams do exactly that. If you have 5 minutes, if you have 15 minutes, you have 45 minutes. If you have the luxury of 45 minutes together, what do you do? I will put that in the resources page, but it's also on our website, the 51545. I think it's one of the favorite things that people, because number one thing is time. That's what we hear all over. Specifically for him, his graphic organizers, we had like 4 or 5 that we knew that we were going to use, and we used them once we figured out why we wanted to use them in one of our 515 conversations. Those were a part of like years of, like that was one of the things that he used, and he could expect it, we could expect it. Having those conversations then on his, we had like a bank of like 4 or 5 slides within a PowerPoint that were just there, and the gen ed teacher got into the habit of, he did have a one-on-one para. Not everybody does. We were hoping to like have less of that over time. Now in his adult life, he doesn't have one, so that's good. But there would be a conversation even going into a classroom. Today I'm going to talk about genetics. I think that the graphic organizer that helps him compare and contrast, that's the one to use. Just the quick, so it does get to that point. But they also did have conversations of what's the most essential content, what are some barriers for him to learn it, what's the instruction, which is part of the 51545. But it also would be like, they'd come up with like the words that were on his, actually, proximal was one that he really wanted him to understand. Superior was another one that he really wanted him to understand, right? So we would have the images and the words in a word bank and a visual bank just baked right into the graphic organizer's slide deck. So if it was something that we were going to be talking about that day, then they could pull them out and just have them for him to manipulate and pull and, you know, drag, and you can see, like, this is the type of thing, like, you know, a click and drag. That was also on Seesaw. So you can just, you know, quickly put these things in, but there's like, okay, if I have him filling in blanks like this, is this going to show you that he's understanding the material? No, that doesn't quite get at it. You know, so that gen ed teacher could say, I really want him to show me this. And then the special ed teacher could offer their expertise as to how best for him to do it. There are also things that, like with assistive technology, that's really important, and this is the only thing that I will say, that, and he got really clever, but using things like Bitsboard and different apps and games and unique ways that you can also just screenshot when there's a, you know, quiz at the end or something like that. That's progress monitoring. He, unfortunately, would get good at like dragging something over in one of the games that, you know, you drag it over, and if it was the right answer, the app itself would just like suck it into the, you know, so then he just like, so we definitely had to like go back to paper pencil for him for a while because he had figured out our technology. So it's just, you know, playing with it, and as a team, like having conversations about where are we going? And I think that I am out of time on this one.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, everybody.